Welcome to the Edges of Lean. I'm Bella Engelbach, and in this podcast we explore the human and creative side of lean thinking, unusual places where lean thinking is practiced. We meet people who are practicing continuous improvement in many different flavors and styles. So come along with me on a journey to the edges of lean. Episode 54, Continuous Improvement in the Growing Organization with Marco Königer. Marco Königer found himself suddenly in a very difficult position. He was in a company that was growing rapidly, much more rapidly than they expected. He found that his lean skills from his Greenbelt training really helped him be a better leader, a better manager, and really manage what was happening in that growing company. But you shouldn't hear about that from me. Let's hear Marco tell his own story. Marco Königer, welcome to the Edges of Lean.
Thanks for having me.
Marco, tell us your story about how you learned about lean.
So let me give you a little bit of a backstory here. 2018, right in January, I started working for one of the biggest food delivery companies in Europe back then. And I was opening a hub for our delivery logistics. So we would have e-bike couriers coming to the hub, pick up their bikes, and then leaving from there for their shifts, delivering food, and then coming back at the hub. And then we would close down the office and begin the next day. And for a time being, it went really well, just scaling up very little. So the very first day, we only had 9 orders, of which 4 of us was taken from our crew, just because we did not have any market awareness really. So this changed over time, and like after month 6 or something, it started really booming. And I'm talking about 100%, 200, 300, and during COVID, even sometimes 400% growth. And before that COVID period, luckily, our company decided, because of the hyper growth, to provide lean green belts to city operations managers. So I met with a bunch of city operations managers from Portugal, Poland, and Switzerland, which were all in my team. And we had I think 4 days of green belt sessions there, and also our exams. And then later on, we would have a project that we would then implement on companies' processes. And this is how I got introduced to lean and started actually liking it in a way.
That's great. So how did you get into the food delivery business? What's your background before that?
Oh, yeah, that's actually not at all my background, because I started sports culture and event management. And the best of that experience was that I was able to do a semester abroad in Bangkok. And I tried to stay in Asia, in Bangkok, but I didn't manage. So I had the luck to be working as an assistant F&B manager at a golf estate in Myanmar, which was kind of paradox, because it's a super poor country, and you would be driving to a golf estate every morning with 18 holes and estate buildings there. And it was just very weird for me. And within this time, I really decided I wanted to be helping people, but I just didn't know how yet. It just felt like with events, I can actually make people happy, and therefore I'm also helping them somehow, right? I would be fulfilling needs for people to be entertained. But it wasn't so easy when I came back and after I defended my bachelor's thesis to actually find a job in that industry, because it's actually very small and there's limited jobs available, and especially well-paying ones are very scarce. So I was lucky enough.
And so that's event management you're talking about. That's this
exactly.
Small industry. Yeah. Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
And luckily, instead of going to my bachelor's party and taking my diploma, I went to a snowboard judging clinic where I met a guy who was hosting the seminar, who was born in the same Slovenian town as me, in Maribor. And he told me that he was planning to organize a skateboard World Cup in the Austrian city of Graz, which was coincidentally the one that my back then girlfriend lived in. And things just fell into place after a few months of trying to get a job and not thinking of him really. I actually reached out to him and asked him if he had a job, and he was like, yeah, actually I do. And then I went to Graz, and together we organized the Skateboard World Cup for 3 years in a row. And during the end of the second year, I was going on a second season of a montage tour, basically, with a live scoring company who provides the live scoring and judging, and as well as TV solutions for and Olympic events. So we went all over the world to just have judging solutions for snowboarding events or for free skiing. And I had a great time because my skateboarding job was only in the summer, and this I could do in the winter, and then I would be coming back to the skateboarding event. But obviously this was not really sustainable, especially if you want to live in a relationship and settle down. That kind of lifestyle is not very well supported. And luckily enough, during my studies, we had a lecturer who told us about LinkedIn and how much of use it could be for us. And actually, I really cured my LinkedIn profile at all times. And apparently it got noticed because a recruiter from that food delivery company messaged me and asked me if I was interested in a job. And I said yes, and this is how it went.
Wow, that is really a great story, and it does go to show the power of social media, right? It is important, especially now, to be on social media and to be where people can find you. Right. So tell me about the the food delivery company. So in the US, we have these food delivery companies that because it's the US, you know, that they're mostly cars, right? So somebody gets an order on an app, they go to a restaurant or a shop and they pick up the food and they bring it to somebody's house. Your company sounds like it's more focused on e-bikes, which is fantastic. Does that work the same way with ordering through an app?
In general, the company has both systems. So we're working in UK where there's car drivers, or in Germany where there's a long history of car delivery. But they just, in I think 2014, 15, they started switching to be more sustainable. And since I've been on board since 2018 in Austria, we've only ever rolled out with bikes, with e-bikes in the first place, and then later on with bikes that the couriers could bring, like provide on their own. We would call them remote couriers, who can start from home instead of like a hub courier who would have to come to the hub to pick up his e-bike, get his bag, his backpack, and just go on the road. And the remote driver drives from home. But in general, yes, it's the very same principle. We have an app, and the driver just has their account in there, and they get the notifications for the delivery pickup, and they get maneuvered from address to address, and then at the end of their shift they bring the bike back.
Right. All right. So you set it out with 4 orders or 10 orders, whatever it was, and 4 of them were from you all. Right. And now it starts to get bigger and bigger, and COVID hits and everybody's stuck at home and they want food. Right. They're tired of cooking for themselves. So what was it like dealing with that kind of explosive growth?
Terrible, to be honest. It was
terrible.
It was exciting, but also, extremely frustrating, because there was, we're talking about 200-300% of growth after a short time of absolute standstill. Because in the beginning of the first lockdown, it wasn't so sure what the restaurants would do. So at first they closed down because the costs of upholding the business only for delivery seemed too high for them. So it took a few months of time until they actually understood and were allowed to make business out of it. And when that started, it really kicked off, and we just needed to hire a lot more people. Everything got incredibly messy. And I was, I think, the only green belt in Austria back then.
Oh my goodness.
And slowly also, the company did realize the potential of lean and continuous improvement very early on. But what they did is to try and centralize as much as possible, because the growth seemed to get a bit out of hand. And the management in Amsterdam felt like they were not able to control the cost or also to support well enough. So they started this continuous improvement department, which was supposed to then help us standardize processes. And that proved to be very difficult, especially in a time of still hyper growth. There were a lot of mandates coming from the top to implement processes, which turned out to be a lot of work from people who have not really had the understanding of operations, and they didn't really understand our priorities. So there was not an organic development of processes or the improvement of those, but it was mandated. And this, actually led to a lot of struggles, and to a point where our lean department is still not really doing lean work, but they are misused as project managers for from time to time. They're writing a lot of SOPs, and we're still not able to properly have that Kaizen mindset and that lean mindset where we're trying to eliminate waste and making communication short. It's not yet very well established, but the company is working very well on giving more and more people the opportunity to become green belts. And I think it's incredibly useful.
That is such a, I think it's actually a really typical story, right? That when an organization realizes how important process is, right? There is frequently this sense, well, we need to standardize, and sometimes that direction comes from the top of the organization, and as you said, when those processes are, you try to apply them to a local situation, they don't always fit. In fact, I would be surprised if they did fit, right? Because what one particular town looks like, what time of day people order, where they order from, how big the orders are, it's going to be different from somewhere else, and who your employees are. So so there's that on the ground variety, but but leadership knows the importance of having the standards. So, but you're on the ground, right? So you're seeing it from the other direction, right? Like this is coming to us. And tell me about writing process. What have you learned in doing this about writing process, and writing process in such a way, SOPs in such a way that people can understand them? What are some of your learnings from doing that?
So in my opinion, SOPs are still one of our biggest topics, especially the ones that are coming from the top. A colleague of mine analyzed it, and he said that basically less than 30% are actually valuable content, but most of it is actually just the layout and the information, etc. But the actual guidance on how to really do a process from beginning to end is often lacking, because it's not being done, the standardized processes that are coming from the top are not being done together with local support, but it feels like they're explaining a process that they have been working with or they have been inventing, but they're not telling it to somebody who has never seen it before. So when I did my green belt, we were supposed to provide the description of a process to somebody who has never seen it, who is that person should be able to do it blindly, more or less, just by having every step precisely described, not over described, but shown in a way that can be executed by everybody. And I think this understanding is just incredibly difficult to implement, especially over country borders, where we do have the same position, but it's not, because labor law is different, and people just have, throughout their history of working with us, developed their own skill set and their own niches, and the markets sometimes really don't go as close to each other as the management would hope. So one SOP cannot be rolled out necessarily throughout all of the countries, and this should necessarily be the goal. Whereas I think that we should really see what we can do from, of course, what we can do centrally is great if we can apply it, but I think that the actual standardization should happen on a much smaller, much more regional level. So especially countries, Austria has its own particular labor law that cannot be even compared with the one of Holland, of the Netherlands. So a lot of the ideas don't work for us, but we can standardize whatever is happening in the different cities throughout Austria. This should be graspable. This is within our charge. This is something that really could be improved on a local level to just really standardize 80% of the processes within a country, within the hubs that are all more or less similar, but still leave some space for individual adaptations.
So do you think that you could start by standardizing the outcome that you want of a process and leave the decision about how within a country or a region you deliver that outcome to the people who are doing it? Would that work better?
Definitely, yeah, because it's focusing on the end goal and the product, right, instead of the process, which can be seen and done from various different ways.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is really hard. I've done this in my past, working in a multinational company, trying to write process or develop process that works everywhere. So even if people are using, for example, the same IT tool, the same system, the system's the same everywhere, but the roles, what we call a job, what a manager does versus what a manager does in another company, working hours, expectations for communication, even down to expectations for respect. And, what is, in one place, it may be perfectly all right for someone to go and do something quite different and not tell their manager because there's a certain amount of freedom. In another place, that would be completely against the local culture to do that, so things would need to be checked. I've seen where there's been, endless disagreements about whether or not a document needs to be signed, which, in today's day and age, actually physically signing a document is, what does that even mean? I mean, most people, if you can't do it on your phone, it's not worth doing. So the technology gets in the way too. So what was the process that you worked on in your Greenbelt project?
So I was trying to remember it. I'm not sure if it's one or two, but I think it was actually to automate the recruitment process. So when I started, I really did a lot of actual paperwork. As a city operations manager, when I hired people, I actually filed out all of their paperwork by hand and then scanned every of the pages. And I think it was like a packet of 18 pages at last that I had to scan in for every driver, every single one that I hired. And this was then scaled like this. We just continued doing that. And we've had piles and piles of contracts lying around and waiting to be sent to our headquarters in Berlin. And during, I think, my first year or something, we started rolling out something that was called Fountain, which is a recruitment platform. So our recruiters would work with Fountain and we would take the data from there, but then we would still have to print it out and sign everything on the spot.
There you go. Yeah,
exactly. But luckily, Fountain started to develop a solution that would allow the data to be automatically imported from that Fountain tool into our Salesforce, like the platform that we were using for accounts. So we would actually save a lot on manual recruiting. So recruiting would first of all not be done in every hub, but centralized by 2 or 3 people that would focus on recruiting for all of the cities only. And then we would take more or less the entire HR process, so the documentation, etc., everything out of the local operations hand and put it into the recruiters and driver HR hands. And yeah, that was a really big process, I have to say. It was coming anyways, but it was lucky that I was able to really implement it, because it felt like, or it feels like in this company, whenever we make something a Greenbelt project, it gets focused and it gets done.
That happens, yes. Yeah. And I have to say, a project involving automating a process, which means, first of all, identifying the process and then, using the tool. But especially when you have a tool that already probably has some internal process design
intrinsic to the tool. To me, that sounds like a very ambitious greenbelt project. That's maybe a step above. I mean, that's just my opinion. Maybe a step above your average greenbelt project. But I think it's really important what you said, that once you have identified, well, this is a project. Well, now somebody's going to care about it getting done, and you're not going to be competing for attention, because it's going to really be a goal to get it finished. So what did you learn, Marco, as you did that project? What were some of your personal learnings?
That even if a project is finished, it's not finished. And it feels like the real work only starts after the implementation.
Yeah. So wow. I mean, there's so much in there, right? I mean, yeah.
So what I've experienced, for example, as local operations, we're very good to jump on the solutions, to start projects and just create an MVP, a minimal
viable product. Yeah.
And just run with it and try to improve it on the go. But we sometimes never really get to a point where it's perfect, or it just dies off after a certain time. So what we're doing now is we are guiding those projects, those greenbelt projects, for several weeks or months after the initial implementation to see if it's really working. So for example, I implemented feedback conversations so that our coordinators would have conversations with the drivers more regularly, and we could have just dropped it on the people with a detailed explanation, but we made a call, we gave a detailed explanation, and we're doing now bi-weekly meetings to get the input of the working process so that we can adapt it on the go in a controlled manner.
So it sounds like you really are now that is a continuous improvement activity, right? So getting that feedback and making changes as a result of the feedback, that is doing continuous improvement. So I think you're moving in that direction. So that works well for you to put the MVP or the next generation of the MVP out there, as long as you have that feedback loop, right? And you're able to act on the feedback. What did you learn about change management with people and people changing their behavior?
So in order to actually start this continuous improvement process on the feedback conversations, we had to fail first. So we didn't do that for, 2 years after I got my green belt. And I wondered how all of these projects that we started were at some point just dropped or never really executed. So change is hard. Change management is difficult. And I think this continuous consultation or the feedback loop after the initiation phase is something that is incredibly important in the change management, because then I think it only starts. Like changing a process, yes, of course, that's the stab wound basically, but it still hurts a lot after actually being stabbed. It hurts for quite a long time.
Oh my gosh.
So it's just a wound that is never really healing if you're not taking care of it properly. And I think this is what you do if you just stop communication, and if people then start to complain about the process because they don't have anybody to give feedback to. So I'm really want to focus more on active listening and really engage with the people who are actually dealing with these processes, so that we can just change them according to their needs.
Yeah. Give them that opportunity to give their feedback and share their ideas, right? Yeah. So how different is that from what you were thinking back to when you were doing event management and working on these big international competitions, which, I guess the competition would happen and then you'd have a long period of time before the next one happened if they was seasonal. How does this compare? Because you have work that's happening every day, right? So you have lots of opportunities to observe. How does it compare to something that is more seasonal like that, or more big event driven?
So the Skate World Cup was one thing because it was a long processing or production period beforehand.
Yeah.
And not so long one afterhand, so you have one peak. But when I worked for the live scoring company, we would have basically 1 or 2 events per week with a lot of the same people. You know, you would be, for example, on tour with the snowboard and free ski people, or on tour with the moguls people, and you would go for 2-3 stops in a row, and there's a lot of same people, so there's always these event crews at site that are preparing, and then you're coming in with the operational event crew, and you're just putting up everything, you're tearing it down, and everything has to be built up within 1 or 2 days, and then basically broken down directly after the event. So there is no change management because change is happening constantly. It's much more problem solving oriented, and sometimes you're not finding the root cause because you just don't have the time to go as deep, so you're just fixing it with duct tape. So this is why duct tape and I don't know how you call them, these cables, like these cable binders, you call
the
them,
bungee kind of things,
these hard plastic ones that people get
cable
cuffed with.
ties, the cable ties,
exactly.
Yeah.
So this is why I think cable ties and duct tape are the most important tools in an event business, because this is how you fix problems. You don't have time to properly fix the root cause of the problem, which might be a broken desk. You have to fix it some other way because you don't have the time
on the fly. But in the world that you're in now, it's important, right, to find the root causes and reduce the amount of duct tape.
Exactly, and not be so jumpy, not really do that. It's the same in life, I think, or in relationship, to not be just jumping on the problem, or just, you know, when somebody's speaking, you're already coming up with a solution to their problem, and people at some point don't react very well to that anymore, because sometimes what they need is to do active listening. And I think this is what change management also requires, is active listening. You're hearing everybody out, you're understanding that there's a problem, you are acknowledging that there needs to be change, and then you need to guide them through the change, because you are most likely not delivering a perfect product. So this is where I think it really begins, and you really need to carry through that process. And the real optimization, what we're all thriving for, and the real standardization can only come with time. It doesn't work from the beginning.
No, you're so right about that. And I think it's so important what you're saying about active listening as part of change management, of change leadership, because I think I always say to people say, well, people hate change. And I don't think people hate change. I mean, people get married, they move, they get a new job. People create change in their lives all the time, right? But what people don't like is change that is either not good for them personally, or that they have no control over it. And sometimes you are in a situation with a new process where what you are going to be delivering will be seen by the people as not being good for them, because, for whatever reason, and, that they didn't have that much opportunity when it was created to have input into. And so I think what you're saying about the active listening is so critical, right? Because people have got to have a chance to tell you, hey, this is horrible. It's really awful. I don't like it. I have to come into work earlier, or I have to do this, or I have to do that. And that's, I think, historically, we haven't been allowed to do that at work all that much. We do that in the pub afterwards, right? We don't do it in front of our manager. So when you go into this active listening mode with the people who are working for you, Marco, when you started to do that, were people shy? Were people afraid to tell you, or were they very direct? Hey, Marco, I've got an earful for you.
I think I've always been very open, especially as a city operations manager. I was much too open. I was very bad with
you were too open.
Yeah, absolutely. I was absolutely letting people much too close, just simply because we were working together. For example, when I opened the hub, I worked 30 days straight. I did office shifts in the morning, and I ran the hub until 11 o'clock at night in the evening. So it was because we just started with me. And then later on, I would get a crew. But like this day never stops. You're delivering. We are not delivering 24/7, but we're delivering 7 days a week and until 11 o'clock at night. So especially in the beginning, you feel responsible for everything.
Yeah.
And so you build more closer connections. But this is also why everybody was always, or at least to a good extent, very open with me. And I would provoke openness by also showing my capabilities to fail, by how I deal with failure and how I hold myself accountable. And I think once people see that you are putting yourself on the line for them, or that you are admitting to mistakes, it becomes a much different conversation, much more open.
That's really beautiful. And it's really very good advice for anyone to let people see you fail and talk about your failures and talk about what's hard for you, which is hard for some people to do. It's not easy for everyone to be as open as you are, but I think it's a very good example. Marco, what do you think is next? Where do you want to go with this knowledge in the work that you're doing or elsewhere?
So I was just talking to one of my direct reports from the city I'm living in, Innsbruck, today, and I really tried to convince him to go for the green belt, because I really think it's so valuable. And I was just talking to my partner, who was also in that green belt school with me in the same day, and she was asking me, like, what, you're doing a lean podcast? What do you know about lean? Like, what is 5S? And I failed to say that. And I was like, well, I maybe don't know all of the abbreviations anymore, but I've been really trying to live by a Kaizen mindset, and really try to eliminate waste, and really try to see how to make all involved parties in the process somewhat happy, and make more efficient processes for them to save them time, because this is my job as a manager. I need to create a workable working environment, and the less time they need in lengthy processes, the more time they have for the pleasure part, where they can actually focus on people. So I will continue to push for the lean agenda, but I will also try to make our management understand that the way that we've been applying the lean department or the continuous improvement department is not the way that it was meant to be deployed. So striving for change constantly.
Yeah, you have really, I think, found the heart of it. I always say on this podcast, we talk about the edges of lean, but it comes back to the heart of it. And the heart of it is, and you just said it so beautifully, Marco, that for managers, that you are creating that environment where it is great to work. It's a great place to work. And because it's a great place to work, there is time to improve. And people are getting the skills, like you were saying to your employee, are getting the skills to learn how to improve. So I think you've really found the heart of it. And whether or not you know every single tool is not as important as understanding that as a manager, this is your job. This is the thing that you should be improving in yourself every day, right? Because I think the tool, something like 5S, is actually, it's a countermeasure, right? 5S is a countermeasure that was developed in order to solve a problem of an operator not being able to find the tool they needed at the time that they needed the tool, and the tool being ready to use, right? 5S is therefore a countermeasure to doing that. That doesn't necessarily mean that 5S is the right thing for you to do in your organization today, because you may have a problem that is not solved by 5S, right? The most important problem that you're facing may not be a problem for which 5S is a countermeasure. If it is, you'll figure it out, because you know what to do. People will eventually say, hey, it would be great if this thing I need was always here, and it was always clean, and it was always ready to go. That's 5S, right? They'll figure it out when you give them the time to do it. So I just want to affirm what you're doing. You're headed down the right path, and you're doing really, really great work, and keep it up, Marco. So now I'm going to ask you, what would be your one piece of advice for a young person starting out in their career?
I knew that you were going to ask this question.
You knew I was going to ask that question.
But I just changed my opinion because I wasn't really sure yesterday. But I think it's really about like listening more and talking less, or talk less and listen more, especially in that continuous improvement environment. Because if you do a root cause analysis, you see how deep these causes are sometimes, or how much they vary from what we're actually expecting. And I think a root cause analysis is somewhat also active listening. You're just really trying to understand more. You're just trying to understand more in just the surface, just the syntax of what is being said, but the actual meaning. And for that to sink in, we need more time. And we're often not giving us the time to really process something because we're so fast to reply. And by listening more, just biting your tongue one or the other time more, I think a lot would be improved in human communication.
That's great. So listen more. And that is a really good insight. I appreciate that insight. Thank you. About the connection between active listening and really getting to root cause. Because especially in the cases that you're talking about, where root cause may not be caused by a piece of equipment, it may be something going on with people. You're not going to hear that right away. More listenings can only help with that. That is really good advice. Thank you, Marco Königer. Marco, if people want to talk to you more about this, where can they find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn, just under my name, and you will have the profile picture that I have on LinkedIn
great
in your description, so it will be easy to identify me. Other than that, I do have a website that is not very well maintained, but I'm really trying to do that from now on, which is leading-better-lives.com, so leadingbetterlives.com. And on Instagram, my name currently still is Travelbeards, so you can always hit me up there.
Travelbeard on Instagram.
And
okay, cool.
My podcast is basically findable on all kinds of platforms. Most people use Spotify, and it's called Leading Better Lives, in which I talk about self-development, empathetic leadership. And I'm also now starting to have guests on, and also talk a bit about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in a little bit of a side gig.
That's great. So for those of you who are listening, if you are itching to be a podcast guest, check out Marco's podcast, or just listen to his podcast. Keep it up, Marco. I'm looking forward to seeing where you go or what you do and how you change the world for the rest of us. So thank you very much for traveling with me to the edges of lean.
Thank you for having me on, Bella. It was a really pleasure.
This is Bella Engelbrecht, and I'd like to thank Marco Königer for being my guest on the edges of lean. How have your lean skills helped you when you're in a growth situation? What has made the difference for you? Reach out to me or Marco and start a conversation. Find Marco on LinkedIn or at leading-better-lives.com. Find me on LinkedIn or at leanforhumans.com. And tell a friend about the edges of lean. Please join me in exploring more of the edges of lean. There's a lot to learn. And check out my friends in the Lean Communicators community at leancommunicators.com. You'll find more podcasts and videos with lots of great new content every week. The Edges of Lean is written and produced by Bella Engelbrecht with support from Podcast Inc. This is a Lean for Humans production.